stand nervous now. I'm not going to do that. So, thanks for, we have a lot of great shows here at the Hideout, but also the Hideout has a Riverwalk location just for the next 3 weeks. And so, yes. So, yeah, if any of you guys been down to our Riverwalk location, okay. So the city is like, we're their token weirdos down on the Riverwalk. They realize that there's tourist potential if you have like a so-called real Chicago or whatever. So they only gave us 90 days. We only have 3 weeks left. But every day we have great stuff. And it's always after work from 5:30 to 7:30. Tomorrow we have the Changeable Trio. Changeable Trio is 3 guys, 2 drummers and a saxophone player that were kicked out of the Vietnam Memorial area for busking illegally. And so we thought they were awesome. So we're like, here, come over here. All right? So now they play on our stage every Wednesday from 5:30 to 7:30. Don't tell the city. And then secondly, and then Thursday, we are going to be doing a Channel 11 kickoff party for a series of documentaries called Independent Screen. And it will be Thursday night at 6 o'clock. We're going to show a trailer of all 7 documentaries that will be showing every month on Channel 11 over the winter. And Abraham Levitan, the piano player for Shame That Tune, he's going to do music in between. So that's Thursday, and then Sunday, Peter Cunningham, you know him?
Yeah, we know him.
He's got a rock band, and it's called the Bread and Butter Band. They're playing Sunday afternoon from 3 to 5. And I joke at them.
He issues the occasional statement about education policy, mixes it into his set.
Is he going to talk about how we shouldn't have an elected school board while he's doing that set? Yeah.
So if you want to go and heckle his entire show of classic rock, you know.
Yeah. Is he here tonight, by the way? He occasionally stops by.
PC.
Yeah, PC. No.
We'll be performing Sunday, though.
Okay.
I don't remember. Anyway, so a lot of good stuff is happening. A lot of great stuff is happening here at the Hideout. Thank you all for being here, and we're really happy to have. I just realized that my family lived in Logan Square, and then of course we moved to the suburbs in the '60s, and then I returned to Logan Square in 1989, and so I realized that when I moved back, my alderman was born. Okay, so.
They're not connected, though.
No, I don't think so. You know, but it's the '80s.
Yeah, it's the '80s.
So,
Who knows?
but it's so awesome to live in a neighborhood for 24 years and have Alderman Rosas as our alderman. So he's here tonight. We're happy to have him coming out. And here is Vic and Ben.
All right.
First Tuesday.
All right. Thanks, Tim.
All right.
That, believe it or not, was the briefest introduction Tim has ever given right there.
No,
you
that's-
guys witnessed it.
Yeah, it's brevity.
We appreciate it. We said less is more, Tim, and so that was great. Thank you all for being here, and thanks right off the bat to our guests, Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa on the end there, and Alderman Howard Brookins Jr. right next to me. I'm Mick Dumke. I now write for the Chicago Sun-Times.
That is correct. Our beloved bright one. And my name is Ben Jarofsky, and I still write for The Reader, at least as of last I heard. So before we get into our interview with our 2 aldermen here, and we have a lot of issues to talk about, I have this, I don't know who it is. It's a reader in Bridgeport who's anonymous, who makes political buttons, and he sends me them every now and then to the Reader address, which I very rarely go to. And so,
And through a little bit of sleuthing, we're pretty sure it's not any of the dailies.
No, yeah, I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
whoever he lives in Bridgeport, he's not a daily. I'm pretty sure of that, unless it's like really weird subterranean stuff. Anyway, so there's like bizarre buttons, very critical of Mayor Rahm, and all sorts of weird looks. And he sent me probably close to 200 of them, and asked me to distribute them at this show. For all I know, yes, he's here tonight only, and since I don't know, I'm assuming it's a he, but could be a she. So anyway, I thought what I would do instead is have our first ever trivia contest. So the winner will get a 200 buttons. No, that's the loser gets 200 buttons. So the winner gets a button of Mayor Rahm in a straitjacket. and it says, "I know better than anyone." And that winner will have to correctly answer the following question. Which high school did Alderman Rosa graduate from? Wow, who got that one? All right, here you go.
Yeah.
Come take your...
Yeah, it happens to be the alderman's. You know what? This is
fuck,
this
what
is
with the
Chicago. Yeah, this is Chicago. It's an inside job. Give her the button.
What you will do to get this button? That's unbelievable. The staff. Did anybody else know that? Oh wow. Okay. Wow. And finally, this button of Rom as, what is that?
That's the Joker, or
Is that a joke? Is that the Joker or some kind
it's
of
a cyborg Joker.
cyber? Okay, having to do with speed limit. If you can correctly tell me, what did Alderman Brookins' father do? What did Alderman Brookins' father do? Okay, that's it. Will we cut? Yeah. The alderman had a good joke there. He said the jury is still out on that. So unless someone could come up with a better answer, I'm going to give the button to that gentleman. Yes? No? I'm the gentleman. Okay. No one knows? Oh, my God. No, he was not an alderman, but you're close.
I think I heard an answer.
Right. Who said that? Did you Google that? Okay, you get the button.
She must be a triple then.
Yeah. She used to. That was a friend of ours named Allison True who used to edit our copy. So
Yes.
we had.
So blame her.
That's right. Exactly. So we had the alderman staffer and our former boss who has answered the questions. Ben, are you willing to give up one more of your precious buttons?
Okay,
I know
yes.
you only have 197 left.
All right, this is a button. I guess that's the same one. So here's an abolish red light camera button. So it's always relevant in this city. So Mick, what trivia question should I ask?
Well, I think the question we were coming up with was, what was the first, and Monica, you don't get to answer
Yeah.
this. All right, what was the first political campaign that Alderman Rosa worked on?
Yes.
I think I know this because I think you told me before, but anyone? Gutierrez?
No.
Are you a Gutierrez guy?
I worked for Congressman Gutierrez.
All right.
Okay.
So that was warm. That was warm. DeValle?
No.
All
That was
right.
mayoral Devalle.
Greg Brewer in the 50th Ward.
I guess it depends what you mean by worked. So if you mean paid, then yes, that is correct. But there was one prior to Greg Brewer in the
Non-paid?
Non-paid.
All right. We will
And
give you
there
the
was a
button
sh-
anyway for knowing Greg Brewer.
And Greg Brewer ran against Bernie Stone in, when was that?
In
2007?
2007, yes.
2007,
That's
okay.
No.
Anyone else?
Wait.
Candidates in this room, actually, that I worked for.
Okay.
But she's also my staffer. So.
Wait, we thought it was Alderman Joe Moore, no?
So my uncle ran for judge in 2006, and there was a Chicago Reader article that was written by Chris Hayes,
Okay,
of
right.
all people.
Yeah.
And his name is Judge Ramon Ocasio, and he's here somewhere. He's
Okay.
right there. Let's
All
point him
right,
out.
Judge.
Hey,
And
for
then
being
I
here,
worked for
Judge.
Greg Brewer in 2007, and
Okay.
then I worked for Joe Moore in the runoff.
Okay, very
Okay,
good. Well,
all right.
Anyway, if anybody wants a button, even if you didn't answer, I have 200 of them. So.
All right. Well, with that warm up, let's talk about what's going on here, guys. We like to, before we dive into the issues, we'd like to hear a little bit about who's up here answering our questions. So we just outed you in the sense, our Alderman Brookins, excuse me, that you're the son of a funeral home director. Your father was also a state senator, correct? State rep and state senator. Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about what, after seeing your father's involvement in electoral politics, what motivated you
Nope.
to become an alderman?
See, it started before then. When I was a young kid, back in the Edward Doliak time, there was an alderman, Niall Sherman, from the 21st Ward. And we got involved, and my family got involved in politics around the busing issue, around Willis wagons, schools, et cetera, on the south side of Chicago. They were coming up with all types, as the south side became more black and around the Beverly, Mount Greenwood, or around the Beverly area, Washington Heights area where we live, in Auburn Gresham. As we moved in and going to Vanderpool, which was in Beverly, it became more crowded. So in order to stop kids from going across certain imaginary boundaries, which gets to the day and why schools are in certain locations where schools are now, my parents organized families to, build proper schools and additions and new schools in the area. And so we got involved with Niall Sherman. And as a kid back then, I would pass out flyers, pick up signs, throw away signs, etc. And at that point is when I wanted to go to, wanted to be in politics. So I took a couple detours. One, in going and being a funeral director. My dad always said, well, I'm not going to pay for you to go to college unless you get this degree so that you could take over the business one day if you want to. So, okay. So I went to SIU in Carbondale, the only four-year university in the state of Illinois that has mortuary science and funeral service. Got the degree, which is an associate, and then got my bachelor's from there. Went to NIU Law School. I went to law school because I wanted to be in politics, but I started trying cases, so I worked for the state's attorney's office and the public defender's office, and I liked trying cases, so I took a small detour and then went back to my passion and ran for office in '99, and I lost. Came in third. I think it was a field of about 12 or 13 at that time because Jesse Evans had gone to jail. The mayor had appointed Leonard DeVille, a pastor, and came in third. And, the day after I lost, a good supporter of mine was knocking on my door saying, okay, get up, it's time to start running for 2003. And I ran and I was successful by 138 votes.
Here, here.
So,
And since then, you just coasted to re-election
yeah,
each
right.
time.
I've been in
right?
3 runoffs, and I think the running joke where I was really covered a lot by Mick was when I was fighting to bring Walmart to the south side of Chicago. And in that year, I assume the year that you were involved with Joe Moore's campaign in 2007, SEIU gave my opponent $500,000. So later on, I've talked to Balanoff, and I said, hey, Tom.
And he's the head of the state council of SEIU.
SEIU. I said, Tom, you could have just gave me $350 and I'd have quit. But I mean, you never know where life is going to take you. And yes, my dad was a state rep and a state senator and did a lot of good work. Stood on his beliefs and got run out of office. I don't know. I'm sure the judge may know this. But my father was a sponsor in the Senate for the judicial sub-circuits. And at the time, nobody liked that idea because Madigan and the powers to be were making as many judges as often as they would like. And so who figured that you would need to break up the county into smaller circuits to elect judges? Well, the thought behind it was that you could get more minority judges, you could get some Republican judges, and at least you would know that the judges started out living in your community.
And of course, a few more women judges with
Yes.
Irish surnames.
A few more.
What the world needs more of.
We never had enough of those. Okay, Alderman Rosa, tell us your story. How did you get so engaged? And I know this is a question you get over and over again because I think you're the youngest member of the city council at this point. But how did you get so into politics so early on in your life?
Sure. So as you know, I was born in 1989, as we were informed earlier today. And I grew up in a family that was always engaged in local electoral politics and was always asking, who's the anti-machine candidate? Who is the progressive reformer that we can support and elect into office? And my parents helped elect Dick Simpson in the 70s in Lakeview. They were very involved with a group that's still around called Lakeview Citizens Council. They also would tell me about Harold Washington. And of course, I wasn't alive during the time of Harold Washington, but as a young child, I always remember my parents talking to me about Harold Washington and everything that was accomplished during his administration. So my grandmother, God bless her, is constantly overvoting. And overvoting is when you mark down two people for the same position. And the reason why she's always overvoting is because I will tell her, oh, you should back this candidate. And then someone else will come along in the family and tell her, oh, you should vote for this candidate. And so she doesn't want to disappoint either of us, and so she'll overvote. But kind of just a memory that is kind of an example of my childhood is when Rahm Emanuel was running for Congress in the 5th Congressional District. And I remember my parents, because they're likely voters, getting all this mail. And I was reading it, and Rahm was sending all this mail. And so I told my grandmother, I said, you should vote for Rahm Emanuel because he's so great. And, I'm like in 5th grade at this point in time, and I'm like reading mail. I think my aunt and uncle, who were in the audience, told her, no, you should vote for somebody else. And so that was another example where she overvoted. In 2006, my uncle decided to run for judge. And he was found qualified by every single bar association in the city of Chicago. He was running in a majority Latino sub-circuit. He was the former president of the Puerto Rican Bar Association, had served as the president on a local school council, Inter-American Magnet School, which is where I graduated from. And none of the Latino Democratic committeemen supported him. And Chris Hayes, who wrote an article, it was a beautiful 2-page thread in the Chicago Reader, said 95% of the time, the slated Democratic candidate for judge will win the Democratic primary. And so here was my uncle, one of the most qualified Latinos to ever run for judge. About 20% of Cook County is Latino, only 4% of our judges are Latino. And not a single Latino machine committeeman supported him. And so what did my family do? We got involved. And this is the first campaign where I remember taking poll sheets and knocking on doors in the evenings, on the weekends. I recruited classmates from high school to knock doors.
What year was this again?
This was 2006, when Chris Hayes was still writing articles for the Chicago Reader.
And so was Ben Joravsky.
Yes, Ben Joravsky. And Carol Marine, God bless her, from the Bright One, she wrote an article about it as well. And because of this coverage, because it was a low turnout election, and because a lot of people knocked doors and got the word out, my uncle did the unthinkable and won. So that was kind of my entry into anti-machine progressive politics. And 2007.
What was the takeaway? What was the lesson you learned from that experience?
The takeaway was that independent progressives can run principled campaigns and win. And
So it's not utterly hopeless.
exactly.
That's the lesson. It's not utterly hopeless.
Yeah, and that you can do it by knocking on a lot of doors and also getting some help from responsible press.
Okay.
And so then in 2007, of course, the city council passes the big box living wage ordinance, and then Daley says, well, no, I want to be friends with Walmart, and I'm going to veto it. And my alderman at the time, Bernie Stone, was one of the people that helped vote to overturn that, to sustain that veto. And so I was really livid. I'm a senior in high school, and I'm like, this is horrible. People in big box stores deserve a living wage. And I looked up the candidates that were running against Bernie Stone, and Greg Brewer, who now lives in Avondale, was endorsed by the Chicago Federation of Labor. So I said, my number one issue is the living wage ordinance. Greg Brewer is endorsed by labor. I'm gonna go knock doors for Greg Brewer. So I volunteered for 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks, they offered me a job, but they said, you have to be here by 4 p.m. every day if you're gonna knock these doors and get paid to do it. So I spoke to my 9th period teacher, and I said, can I please not attend 9th period class so that I can knock doors for this candidate? And God bless her, she let me do it. And so I would skip 9th period at the end of the day at Whitney Young, and I would go up to Rogers Park, and I would knock a lot of doors. So that was my earliest experience in politics. And so after I graduated from the University of Illinois-Urbana-Champaign, I got a job as a congressional caseworker in the office of Congressman Luis Gutierrez. I said, oh, he's this progressive congressman. You know, he's fighting the good fight in Washington, D.C. This is going to be really great. But what I experienced was a lot of people that were facing a lot of issues that I, as a congressional caseworker, could not solve. So people would come in and day out and say, you know, I'm facing foreclosure, or I'm facing deportation. And while I could put a Band-Aid on the issue, I really couldn't address the root cause. And I said, I need to get out from behind this desk and organize to build people power, because I think that's one way that I can help address the root causes of these issues. So I was really desperate to get into a union organizing position, because I think that union is the best way to build the American middle class and is the best anti-poverty program. And the job that I got was at Unite Here, but it was behind a desk. And so I was helping with contract enforcement. I was helping to translate documents to the mainly Latino membership of Unite Here.
Unite Here represents?
15,000 hotel and hospitality workers, our airports, casino workers in Indiana and Illinois.
Now, Howard, did Unite Here ever give money to any of your opponents?
I think everybody gave money to my opponent.
Well,
And you know, you start off, because I started off running an anti-Daley campaign when I was first elected. One of my favorite phrases would be, the emperor has no clothes. And nobody could seem to tell anything to Daley. You couldn't seem to break through his entourage of people that insulated and surrounded him from finding out what was really going on in the neighborhoods. And ended up being strange bedfellows on the same side of the Walmart thing. And I didn't come to that easily, but it was like, no jobs, some jobs. No jobs, some jobs. What am I supposed to do with a rusty steel mill that was vacant for 20 years, that nobody had any interest in? And with respect to aldermen, they don't care how many constituent services requests you do. It is, what have you done in the community in the 4 years that you've been in office? And so, to me, Walmart was the key to get goods and services to a community that we had a hard time getting goods and services in, particularly, so say you lived in the 21st Ward, you want to take your grandkid or kid fishing. There's no place to go buy a fishing rod anywhere close to my house. So just basic goods and services. And so because of Walmart, we got Lowe's Home Improvement. We had a Best Buy for a while. Other stores started to sprout out around the Walmart. Et cetera.
well, it's interesting that this singular event, you were on opposite sides. And in retrospect, do you buy his argument, or do you still think Greg Brewer was correct back in 07?
So I think that we really need to push back against the race to the bottom. And we're constantly told that we need to pay workers less because we're competing in a global economy. And the only way that our economy is going to grow is if we allow big corporations that are already turning very large profits to pay workers even less. So, I mean, I believe that Walmart would have still come to the city of Chicago. Obviously, they wanted to maximize their profits. That's what corporations always do. But I think that they would have come and they would have abided by the big box living wage ordinance. It would have taken them some time, but they saw a way to defeat that measure with the support of Daley, and that's what they did.
Well, just so I know nobody can remember what happened a year ago, let alone 8 years ago, but this was a particular ordinance that I believe Joe Moore was sponsoring from the
Yes.
49th Ward, and it would have forced big stores, that's big boxes.
Over a certain square
size.
footage, they would have had to pay workers above the minimum wage. I think it was like $10 an
think
hour
it was-
plus
Right.
benefits.
Yeah, I think it was $10 an hour and then $3 an hour in benefits.
Benefits.
In
right.
effect, you won, I would say, because we have across the board minimum, even Mayor
Yeah, but it hasn't
Emanuel.
kept up with inflation.
Yeah, it hasn't kept. Yeah, your position in principle may have won, but the people who work in these stores.
But that really defined that election, and it defined Mayor Daley, what turned out to be Mayor Daley's last term, right? Because it was that the battle sort of in the city council happened right before the 2007 election. I think it happened about 2006 or something. And the city council, very contentious debate, an actual debate, I might add. Got to get my jabs in about the rubber stamp city council while we can. But they had a very vibrant debate, right?
Yeah.
And the city council narrowly passed this minimum wage ordinance for big box stores, and then Daley ended up vetoing it. And a couple aldermen switched positions, and the city council couldn't overcome the veto.
So it was
That's
an
essentially what
override
happened.
veto. Now, that of course is ancient history. Let's move up. It's 8 years to the vote that we're coming up, and that of course there's several big votes. We were just discussing this, but I suppose the number one issue would be Mayor Rahm's proposed property tax hike. And just for the city alone, I believe it's what, $543 million. Am I correct on that? $543 million. There's $45 million for the schools that he's thrown in there. So, have you decided which way you're going to go on that? Yes or no?
So the Progressive Caucus on July 30th presented to the mayor and his budget director proposals, which are right here in this beautiful document. And it's a way that the city can raise badly needed revenue right now without having to go to Springfield, without having to turn to a property tax increase. The mayor said we will look at these ideas, we will incorporate them into our budget. As of today, the only idea he took from the Progressive Caucus was a parking ticket amnesty. And so if he doesn't move in a more progressive direction and really look at the progressive revenue ideas that the caucus has brought him, that at this moment in time, I can't vote for that because there are alternatives that can lessen the take that has to come in from this property tax increase.
Give us one alternative in terms of raising money that
Sure.
would not require Springfield's approval.
So one of those is a stormwater stress tax. So there's non-permeable pavements, like large cement parking lots, that put a major stress on our stormwater system. Chicago is experiencing record rainfall right now. I'm sure you've probably seen flooding in your neighborhood. A stormwater stress tax would assess a fee or a fine for these large non-permeable surfaces. So if you think of Home Depot and they have a large cement parking lot, they would have to pay hundreds, if not thousands, per year to the city of Chicago. If you then multiply that out and look at all the businesses that have these large cement parking lots, you're looking at lots of money that could potentially come in. The other thing we're looking at too is a TIF surplus. To the mayor's credit, he's declaring a little over $100 million TIF surplus. The Progressive Caucus feels that we could do as much as $400 million. There are some folks out there that feel that we can do as much as $1.5 billion.
Yeah.
But that's one way that we could generate hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah. Ben Joravsky, F tips. And another way that we can also raise revenue, and this is something that I know a number of aldermen are actually seriously looking at, not just members of the Progressive Caucus, is an alternative minimum property tax for the Central Business District. And that would say we need to look at our Central Business District, the skyscrapers downtown, and say a minimum amount of money, a floor, has to come from the Central Business District from the property tax levy. As we know, these large firms that hold these skyscrapers go to firms that are connected to Speaker Madigan and to Chairman Burke, appeal their property tax, and they're paying a lot less than they should. And so I think that we're researching ways that the city can ensure that they're not appealing it so low that they're then shifting the burden to the rest of the city of Chicago.
Okay.
All right, Alderman Brookins, should we be soaking the rich? Is that what we should be doing?
All right, so we're going to take a different approach on this. A property tax essentially will hit those large businesses that you're talking about putting a tax on parking lot surfaces on anyway, because businesses pay more taxes than the average, than homeowners, just the percentage in how taxes are calculated. So essentially, it's the same as doing a property tax. And I think this is one of those situations where how we differed on Walmart and all politics is extremely local. You have to represent the people who have elected you and brought you to the table. In my ward, I represent people who predominantly have houses. We have very few apartment buildings in the 21st ward, mostly single-family houses. Our average property value is $117,000. And so those folks will pay $120 a year in increased taxes. Now, if you're a senior and you have some freezes or some other exemptions, you probably won't even pay that. So the garbage fee, we hate the garbage fee because that would essentially double the tax that the residents in my ward would have to pay. And if you should own a two-flat, then you're tripling the tax that those residents would have to pay. I would like to truly reform TIF. I would like to see TIF money go to truly low income and areas that are in an economic depression. I want to tell Rauner in Springfield, and the Black Caucus have been pushing this idea for years now. Before you can declare a surplus and send it back, and all of the money doesn't come back to the city of Chicago. Some of it goes back to the city of Chicago, goes back to all of the various taxing
Talking about
agencies.
TIF surplus.
TIF surplus, all of the various taxing agencies. But before you could send it back, do we have any places that are broken like Inglewood and Austin and West Garfield and places like that? Those are the places that it is hard to find economic development, and no, Walmart won't come to those areas unless there's some type of significant investment. We see that incentive. We see that places like United Airlines, they needed $18 million to go to the economically depressed Sears Tower at the time. So why do you think
Wait. I don't think they needed it. They
Well-
were given it. There's a difference between needing something and being given
Well,
something.
I agree. They weren't.
I think he was being sarcastic.
That was
Yeah.
sarcasm?
That was sarcasm.
Wait, did you vote for it or against it?
I probably voted for it.
Okay. But you
so TIF-
sarcastically voted
but,
for it.
So, with respect to TIF and little dirty secret is I gave this issue to Jesse Jackson Jr., who was thinking about running against Mayor Daley, and told him, hey, there's hundreds of millions of dollars that we really don't know where it's going because every alderman treats the TIF as their own fiefdom, and we really could not see the full picture of how the TIFs were being used, what they were being used for, et cetera. Most aldermen would defer, oh, it's in your ward. The TIF was created in your area. I will defer to that alderman if that's what he wants to do with respect to the money.
So, I'm assuming that you're going to vote yes for the property
I
tax
think
act?
that the property tax increase is the fairest and does what the alderman is talking about. Putting the burden on the people who can more afford it, and without anything else, I think that we start, if we keep running away from the property tax, at one point we'll get to the same way we did with the parking meters. The meters had not been raised in more than 25 years. It had been like a third rail of politics. Nobody wanted to touch it. Nobody wanted to do anything about it. And therefore, the only way that the parking meters became valuable is when someone dramatically raised the rate of the parking meter. Other than that, in 100 years, we never would have made $1 billion at the rate we were at.
Are you saying we should sell the property tax system
should.
to the Emirate of Abu
No,
Dhabi?
I'm saying that we should have been incrementally raising the property tax to pay our obligation as opposed to coming up with trickery and other things like red light cameras, which I voted against, to fund our government.
What if we had a button sale of anti-red light cameras program? All right. Anyway, Alderman Rosa, one of the arguments I hear is that Chicago's property taxes for most people are actually fairly low, relatively low compared to some surrounding neighborhoods. And now we hear, the mayor saying that with if he gets, obviously he's probably not going to get this from Springfield, but if he gets, the relief program that he wants, that a lot of people will actually end up paying less, and that this is his big push to actually make the property tax system here more progressive. You don't buy that.
So recent analysis shows that Illinois and the city of Chicago are considered part of the terrible 10. And that's the 10 most regressive taxing governing bodies in the United States. So yes, I concede that because there are people that own $1 million plus properties downtown, yes, they will see a higher property tax bill. But what we're talking about is the ability to pay that increased bill. And in my community, which about a third of my ward is in Logan Square, we have seen rapid development and rapid gentrification, which has meant that you now have senior citizens, you now have long-term residents that are on a fixed low income, and finding $250, finding $500 more per year is going to put a serious strain on their budget. And we know that the number one reason why people choose to sell in gentrifying neighborhoods is rising property taxes. Rents will go up. My chief of staff, actually, she lives in Ukrainian Village. Her landlord just told her rents are going up. I think it's because she knows I'm an alderman. He works for alderman. But we have to talk about who has the means to pay. And all the analysis tells us that in the state of Illinois and in the city of Chicago, we are not asking those with the most means to pay to contribute their fair share. And so we have to find ways as a city to do that, and I think the Progressive Caucus has done just that. And you're absolutely right. The exemption isn't going to happen. If it happens, it's a miracle. God bless Rauner, but Rauner is holding this state hostage with his mad anti-union agenda, and I think Rauner has made it pretty clear he's not going to let the exemption go through. So we have to be creative. I think that's what the Progressive Caucus has done. But ultimately, I don't see the city of Chicago or the state of Illinois getting out of this financial crisis unless we amend our Constitution to allow a graduated, fair income tax system. And we need to change state law to allow the state or the city to impose a financial transaction tax. The city of London has had a financial transaction tax for longer than the city of Chicago has been incorporated.
And they're not bankrupt.
Right.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, well, there's a bunch of things to
pretty
follow
much
up on
agree
there,
with what
but
you
let's
just said.
just to make sure that we're covering stuff, I wanted to ask you guys about another issue in the news, and that is our police superintendent.
Oh, yes.
I believe both of you signed on to the Black Caucus's call to have Gary McCarthy dismissed and replaced. Explain that. Alderman Brookins, I think you first raised this issue. Quick little backstory. You first raised this issue a couple years ago, and when you were the chairman of the Black Caucus, and you basically said, if we don't see a little more responsiveness from this department, we're done with this guy. And I believe that it was 2 days later that a picture appeared in the paper of a criminal defendant that you represented as an attorney who'd done some bad stuff. You work as a criminal defense attorney, and the implication was, the guy calling for the police chief to do better, look, he's defending a gangbanger. And so, that was put out there. What's that?
He was not guilty.
He was not guilty. Well,
No,
that didn't
but-
matter, though,
No,
did it? I mean,
it
politically.
doesn't. But no, in all seriousness, and I asked the superintendent today, 78% of all of the murders that you hear about are African Americans. 78% of all the shootings are African Americans. So African Americans are disproportionately affected by the spike in violence, and we hear it in our communities each and every day. They've employed various strategies, and they say, oh, look, the statistics say that crime is going down. But if you don't feel safe, you're not safe. And so I stood with the chairman, which is Rod Sawyer now, and my colleagues. I think it was all but one who said, no, he shouldn't go. The mayor's holding firm with respect to his pick. If it was Daley, I think the average tenure for a commissioner under Daley was about 18 months. Seemed like every 18 months or so, a different commissioner was being turned over in the department. So we think that some things need to happen with respect to that there needs to be more responsiveness. And then when I get on my ultra left, I don't think that McCarthy's done enough to rein in the Chicago Police Department, because we're also spending hundreds of millions of dollars in lawsuits. So I was one of the first people to say, hey, Bert should not get a pension. We need to root out all of these people who were with that. I don't know what the people in the audience do, but I could say that if you cost your job $10 million, would you still expect to have your job? And I think the answer is no.
Well, so that was a very impressive display of force by the Black Caucus. I think it was 14 out of 18, if I recall, and the three
Couple
of
of
them,
us weren't there.
were just would have been there but couldn't been
No,
there.
I had to leave early. Well, I hate to slap on
So
my
where's
caucus.
what I'm leading him to is Mayor Rahm's response is I'm not going to get rid of them.
So far, he's holding firm, and the caucus is not relenting. That still is our official position.
So would you link it to something like the budget vote?
I don't know that it's hard enough to get 18 or 17 people to agree to anything. Yeah. So I don't know that we can link it to the budget vote, but we will hold firm with respect to that. We've had other members in other caucuses say the same thing. Other people are coming aboard. There will probably be a steady drumbeat that this should be his last stand. And
But if you really want to get rid of McCarthy, you have to force the mayor to make a tough decision.
It's group dynamics and getting votes together and keeping. So you really have to be able to keep the caucus together. And I don't know that a majority will say, I'm not going to vote against. The budget chair is not going to vote against her budget. That's her budget. So I don't know that we'll ever
it's
get
the
there.
mayor's budget,
But-
that he asked her to shepherd through.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You put it
In fact,
that
all the chairs of all the committees are the mayor's chairs.
All right, Carlos, what was your take? Why did you go to this press conference and stand in solidarity with the Black Caucus on this issue?
Sure. So a little backstory. I'm a big believer in black-brown coalitions. Obviously, it was a black-brown coalition that helped elect Harold Washington. And when I met with Alderman Roderick Sawyer, who's the chair of the Black Caucus and a member of the Progressive Caucus, I said, when the Black Caucus decides to do something, you let me know, because I will be with you, right? Because I want to support the Black Caucus on the issues that it's championing. And he came to me and said, we're going to call for McCarthy's resignation. I said, absolutely, I'm there. I think that 5 years of failed leadership is enough. And when you do not see the results that the city so desperately needs, you need to bring in a new direction and leadership. We see this happen all the time, right? So the mayor is a big believer in corporate America. In corporate America, I don't think they'd accept failed results for 5 years. I don't know necessarily why he's decided to stick with McCarthy, but I do feel that it's time for a change in leadership in the Chicago Police Department.
All right, let me play devil's advocate here. There obviously has been an uptick in homicides and shootings this year. That's also true for a number of other large cities. Not that I'm saying that's a good thing anywhere, but just to offer that context. And secondly, we're still way below where we were both when McCarthy started and certainly 20, 25 years ago, way below. And thirdly, what do you think another superintendent would do differently? Do you actually think that someone else coming in would have a different set of strategies? So defend yourselves, come on.
So I think that McCarthy has come from a certain school of thought that functions off of the broken windows theory, that functions from a place that says we need aggressive policing, we need stop and frisk. We don't call it stop. This is the secret about Chicago. The secret is that we call it contact cards. So if you ever hear someone talking about contact cards, they're talking about stop and frisks, which means that you go into a community and you essentially find people that you think are suspicious, you stop them, you make a police stop, and you record that stop. So we have had really aggressive policing policies pushed by the superintendent, and it isn't giving us the solution that it hasn't given us the results that we need. And so I think it is time for a change. I want to see another person come in and bring in a breath of fresh air, right? He's been in that position for 5 years. And let me say, I think this too about elected officials. So, you know, in that case, voters get to decide when they want to bring in a breath of fresh air. And I think in this case, aldermen and the mayor are the voters that decide when McCarthy's time is up. And I think that we have a good number of aldermen in the city of Chicago saying McCarthy's time is up.
That's spoken like someone who spent the first 22 years of his life under the reign of Mayor Daley. Alderman Brookins, what's your take on this? Do you really think there would be an upgrade? You've been alderman through a series of police superintendents. Has Gary McCarthy really done anything different strategically than Jody Weiss, than Phil Klein, than Terry Hillard?
And going back to our former government and aldermen and our practices and customs over the years have been to defer to the local alderman. In his ward, it may be something. In our ward, what we have people calling is people selling loose cigarettes, open air drug markets in some of the other wards, et cetera. And so it's a bunch of quality of life issues that occur in our wards, which tend to run us out of office faster than a big box vote or some other vote like that, that really affect our communities. And I think that what McCarthy heard today from our caucus was that those complaints were falling on deaf ear, and that we really need to have true community policing, that when he went out on his listening tour, none of the local aldermen were invited to go or elicit their input or have community residents who storm our office each and every week demanding certain services, et cetera. And so, yes, I think that there could be a different approach than McCarthy has. He's also pushing for the same stuff that doesn't work, specifically mandatory minimums. And as one that practices criminal law, any crime you get caught with, if you have a gun, it is 15 years on top of whatever the crime was. So if it's a robbery and now it's an armed robbery, if the mandatory minimum was 6 years for the robbery, add 15 years on top of that. And so to say that, oh, we're having all of these guns and we're having all of this crime, when the state of Illinois had the toughest gun regulations for years until the Supreme Court finally struck it all down, that's apparently not the reason.
Howard, I have a question for you. 14 out of 18 members of the Black Caucus showed up for a press conference. Most of them are extreme Rahm loyalists who've voted for everything he's wanted. Again, I would say 17 out of the 18, as I understand it, are for want McCarthy gone. I think Will Burns is the only alderman who's gone on record, black alderman, who said he supports him. And yet only, as I understand it, 2 aldermen who are not.
3.
3? You, Scott, and who's the third?
Alderman
Rena.
Villegas, Alderman Scott Waguespack, and myself. I don't know if Alderman Arena's in that too.
Okay, who was the first alderman? I didn't hear you say.
Villegas.
Okay, so only 3 out of the remaining 30 or so non-black aldermen. Why such a lack of support from your colleagues in the city council for an issue that's so crucial to your community?
I wouldn't classify it as a lack of support. I don't know that we have, and our chairman had reached out to them to lobby them. This was a hastily put together press conference last minute, which was why everybody kind of didn't have time to get the phone call from above to say, don't stand there, don't say anything.
Oh, so if they got the call, how many would have been there?
They're on record now.
It's too late.
It's too late. So in doing that, I think that there are other people out there that are not satisfied with the policing and the policing efforts or the answers that they've been given by the superintendent of police. And whether in my ward is shootings, in your ward might be garage burglaries, or whatever it is, it's a quality of life. And if it continues to happen, you won't want to live there for whatever the reason. So I think that there is broad support, but again, it's the mayor's pick. He won the election, and he gets certain prerogatives.
Yeah.
And I want to add this, and that's that aldermen are invited to CompStat meetings, and these are meetings that McCarthy has. It's like something out of The Wire. All the district commanders are there. McCarthy's there. All the brass from the city police department are there, and they put up these screens, and the district commander comes forward, and McCarthy's sitting there. He just starts grilling them. And I've been to 3 of these CompStat meetings now, and the only thing I ever hear Superintendent McCarthy say is, "We need more contact cards. We need more contact cards," which again is Chicago's code word for stop and frisk. And so that is the base, in my understanding, of his policing strategy. He imported it here from New York. Of course, that practice has now been done away with in New York. And you know, I'm not an expert when it comes to policing, but I think that certainly with the resources that the mayor's office has at its disposal, we can conduct a search, do the research, and find someone that will bring in fresh ideas to the city of Chicago.
I have to pick up on something you said earlier. It's a slight deviation from this, but related, sort of. You were talking about how even when you were very young, you were inspired by the notion of a Black Latino coalition. And yet, in this last election, when it came down to a one-on-one between Jesus Garcia and Mayor Rahm, the mayor won largely because he won decisively in the black communities. I think he got about 55% of the vote, right, Mick? Something like that in the black community. So what happened? Why weren't black voters willing to vote for this man, Garcia, who had been Harold's ally and has always been a progressive? What happened to the coalition?
Yeah, Chewy could have won this election. I think what we saw was malpractice. And if there was a doctor or a lawyer who had done some of the strategic decisions that were made on the Chewy campaign, in their practice, that person would probably be facing a lawsuit. And one thing I want you to think about is think about Rahm's first commercial, think about Rahm's second commercial, Rahm's third commercial, think about the Rahm Love commercials.
Yeah.
Who was the spokesperson for the mayor in each one of those commercials? It was a black woman. Right? And so the Rahm campaign very intentionally and very deliberately courted the black community. And I did not see that same concerted outreach effort from the Chewy Garcia campaign.
So when you say malpractice, you're talking about Chewy's strategists, the people who ran his campaign.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
I didn't see him, so he didn't reach out. I think you're right. There was not enough. People didn't know him, and kind of when you go to the county board, you can kind of live your existence in anonymity to an extent. That aldermen are higher profile. We get more of the attacks, but we also get more of the press. So many people, and Carlos may not have known who Chewy Garcia is. So if you imagine there are a bunch of people who were born around the same time who were voters, and other people who weren't just paying attention, you wouldn't have known who Chewy Garcia was. And so I agree, there was no relationship. Would they have known who Luis Gutierrez was? Probably. And he probably would have ran a different campaign. But
Yeah,
I'm just
no,
saying the overall name recognition and who a person was. You can't beat somebody with nobody.
Well,
And so if you know somebody or know who they are, you're more akin to vote for them. So the African American community truly knew who Rahm Emanuel was. He got some of the goodwill from Barack Obama, and we saw that 4 years prior as African Americans were knocking on the door saying, hey, would you support Danny Davis or Carol Mosley Brown? And they were saying, oh, well, Barack Obama said. And I'm like, that's not what he said. But
yeah.
I just don't think that anybody really knew Chewy Garcia, and at that point weren't willing to take the
Right.
chance.
And I would say, and that's the failure of the campaign. I think anyone in the city of Chicago could have tell you Rahm Emanuel's campaign message, right? He makes the tough choices that ultimately are in the best interest of our neighborhoods. And Chewy Garcia's first message was 1,000 more cops, right? That's not a message. That's a platform,
Strategy.
right? A message is a narrative about who you are and why it is that you're qualified to serve the people of the city of Chicago. And I really didn't see that message come through until the very end of that campaign. And at that point, it was too late. Because Chuy had a beautiful narrative about a man who's always prioritized neighborhoods, that's always taken on big and powerful special interests, that has very intentionally built coalitions with black voters and with progressive Anglo voters across the city of Chicago. And I didn't see that message come through. I heard over and over again 1,000 cops, which doesn't tell me anything about who you are or why you have the credentials to lead the third largest city in the United States.
We want to get to some questions from the audience, but I wanted to ask you guys before we do about dealing with the mayor. And Howard, I want to start with you because, well, let's go back to when you were elected, essentially challenging the Daley administration, and then even after that, I believe there was a famous incident where Mayor Daley.
Both threatened?
Well, yes, exactly. Howard and I always had a bond because we were both threatened by Mayor Daley. He, of course, once picked up a gun at a press conference and threatened to shove it up my ass and shoot me. And he also threatened you on another occasion. Tell that story, and then you mentioned a minute ago that people didn't get the call on this one from the mayor's office. Explain how if that's literally true. But start with the Daley story.
So we were in the back in the ante room. Mick was in earshot, and one of the aldermen had come to the mayor and said, "Oh, Alderman Brookins is running somebody against me." And the mayor turned to me and said, "Well, you're running somebody against him. You're running somebody against him. You ought to run for mayor, and we could meet on the battlefield." I looked. Okay, we ought to meet on the battlefield. But so that was the overture. And he ended up supporting me because then that was the election that the unions, I guess the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So when the unions started attacking me, Daley ended up supporting me in that election. But
the unions were even worse than you were, as it turned out.
I guess so. So we would frequently clash about a bunch of things. I think police brutality and police issues had been my thing. Prior to me being elected, we had done police civil rights type cases. I knew all of the terrible things and just defending people that the police would do and had been accused of. And Daley just didn't believe in that. Wouldn't listen to it. When I ran for state's attorney, told me, "Howard, you shouldn't be so hard on the police officers. You know, there are 14,000 of them, and they have families, and they vote." And, you know, I get that. My dad was a cop for 14 years, et cetera, but there are certain ways about policing. I think that everybody can tell you, if you've ever been stopped by a state trooper will yes sir you and no ma'am you to death and give you 10 tickets. But the police come off with this cavalier attitude that they are not public servants and that you're less than dirt and can talk to you any type of way. And so our clashes have been with respect to that. The difference in Rahm and Daley is that Daley had been in office so long. He had so many people that insulated him from everybody that they were not open to really any new ideas. It was his way or essentially the highway. I came up in 1999 when I ran, and in 2003. There were people from HDO that was actively helping my opponents in those elections.
This is the Hispanic Democratic Organization, which was, I don't even know, it wasn't even really Hispanic-led.
No, it was,
it was a Daley,
I thought
a
Victor
wing
Ray,
of Daley.
Right.
Yeah.
So Rahm has at least been willing to listen and make minor tweaks or make tweaks. If you say my issue is X, he'll try and address your issue. He'll still try and push forward with his agenda, but he will try and address the major concern that you have. So, for example, when the Black Caucus says we don't like the garbage tax because it's going to disproportionately affect our community, and for the same reasons that Carlos said, our residents won't be able to afford it, yada, yada, yada. He says, well, what if we come up with some type of exemption for seniors? Or what if we do this, or what if we do that? So he'll try and do it, but I think also Daley understood really local politics, and a lot of people liked him for that. versus Rahm is used to dealing with so much gridlock, so much in your face. It's our way or the highway out of Washington, D.C., that there's a culture shock between the two, Washington, D.C. and the city of Chicago and local politics and how services are delivered.
How do you see it, Carlos? You've never dealt with Daley. But how's Ron been
Well,
treating
I mean,
you?
I think first I'll talk about it from the perspective of being a non-council member, and my analysis is that Daley the First built a political machine off of patronage workers, right? And so his clients were the city's middle class, right? It was people who had city jobs and in return pounded the pavement for the right candidate. I think Daley II, we saw a transition away from the traditional patronage system and more towards a neoliberal corporate clientele system, in which you had very deep-pocketed campaign contributors who cut the right size check and in return got very lucrative deals out of the city of Chicago. And famously, Daley II got booed in 2008 when the AFL-CIO hosted a presidential debate in the city of Chicago at Soldier Field, which to think of a Daley being booed by labor was just kind of shows how far we've come. So I think that Rahm completely sees his clientele not as the people in the neighborhoods of the city of Chicago, but as the Ken Griffins of the world and the Rowners of the world and the Boeings and the Hyatt Corporation. And he's made that very clear in meetings with the Progressive Caucus where he said, I think that I have to make sure this is a corporate-friendly city. So I don't think he cares that I've been elected in the 35th Ward. I think he thinks that I'm kind of just like a spear against his elite tank. But nonetheless, hey, I'll run at him with the spear if that's what is in the best interest of my constituents.
Have you ever just the image of the spear in the tank? Has he ever chastised you or tried to bully you?
So the mayor has legislative staffers, and very early on, they would text me at 10:30 p.m. They would text me at midnight, and just go and these paragraph-long texts, basically just chastising me for saying a certain thing in the media. And then when they realized that I just didn't care or that I wasn't going to tote the line, no matter how many times they told me this is what the mayor wants from you, then they kind of stopped texting me, which I'm okay with.
Just ignore you. Okay.
And Howard, is that literally
Happened to
true?
me.
It's happened to you too?
No, as the chairman of the Black Caucus, I wouldn't shut up in the press, and so there was an article that came out that Brookins says that there are not enough African Americans in his cabinet. So he came to me and said, "Why did you say that?" I said, "Because I'm the chairman of the Black Caucus, and if I didn't say it, my community wouldn't respect me, and my caucus wouldn't respect me, and I wouldn't be in this position." And it's true. You don't have enough African Americans in your inner circle. So that was my, and standing up to him, and then he backed down. Okay, I understand. But the staffers don't generally call me with that. They'll call my staff, and I'll say, hang up on them.
Are they? My perception of a lot of Rahm staffers is that they're like true believers. They're sort of like they're really in this. It's almost like a little Rahm cult. Am I wrong about that, or what's your perception?
I think you find that they do have a lot of loyal staffers because one, they're young. They're as young as Carlos. So that this is the first campaign or political person that they've worked for. So they are true believers. Some of them have come from out of state, so that they don't know the history of Chicago or why things have happened over the years, et cetera. And I would tend to agree with that.
It's funny because I don't think Ron believes in half the stuff he's doing. So why would anybody believe in him?
Well, it's like a lot of them see Rahm as, I think, as to your point, Howard, about them coming in from out of state. A lot of them see Rahm as the national Democratic figure that he was, and not his place in Chicago politics. And as both of you guys pointed out, sort of his lack of understanding of how ward level or precinct level politics works here. They certainly don't get that. If they're in their 20s and they came from the East Coast or whatever, and they know Rahm Emanuel as the former Democratic Party operative, so to him it's like, hey, he's fighting for Democratic Party issues, and it plays out very differently here, obviously. Let's get some questions from the audience. Yes,
Comments
sir.
or jokes?
What are the odds of raising property taxes on people who live in the downtown area? They make they make more money than most people who earn $200,000
Oh, okay.
So,
Wait,
First of all, this is the
Just
first
repeat
reference of the night to Rahm Emanuel is Tiny Dancer, which references, I believe, his undergraduate degree in ballet. But the question was basically some sort of tax that is predominantly on wealthy people downtown, and also the second part of your question was
Like a luxury tax,
some
Tax.
sort of luxury tax.
like on boats and.
So the state of Illinois dictates what the city of Chicago can charge in terms of sales tax and service taxes, and so that would require a change at the state level. As for an alternative minimum property tax, I know that there is one alderman who is not a member of the Progressive Caucus who has told me that he is working on this issue and hopes to bring an ordinance to the council soon. And then I know that another member of the Progressive Caucus is also working on an ordinance. And so I do believe that sometime in the near future we'll see an ordinance introduced that will move us in the right direction.
in terms of a sales tax, you're talking?
Not in terms of sales tax, in terms of trying to shift the burden of a property tax increase to the central business district. A lot of research is being done right now. How do you do that? Do you draw a map around downtown? Do you say it's these zip codes that have to pay the minimum of the property tax? There's research being done right now.
Well, what you
about-
could do is, and I'm not being facetious, just put a giant TIF around it, but have the money, instead of being used for the downtown, just have it be used for other things. You guys vote for TIFs all the time anyway, might as well.
That's a great. I mean,
I
I,
should be the
I
mayor.
think that's a great suggestion. So, the question then is, once this ordinance is introduced, do we have the votes? And I will say, I applaud whenever my colleagues are independent and take bold action, like calling for the departure of McCarthy despite the mayor not being on board. But we have a charter school moratorium resolution that has 40 plus sponsors, and it looks like that's not going to be brought to a vote. We have a Keeping the Promise ordinance that will help protect affordable housing in the city of Chicago that has over 26 sponsors, and that's been languishing for months. And so we really do live under a system where until the mayor says it's okay, a lot of times we won't see those issues move forward. So we need enough city council members to really go to the mayor and say, we need this from you, Mr. Mayor, in order for it to move.
And some of the issues, because they haven't been done before, they're going to be tested in the courts. And the problem is, we know the property tax works. We don't know that any of these other things are going to are going to hold up to scrutiny. Remember that we thought we had several pension deals that were voted on in the House and the Senate and signed by the governor, only to be struck down. We can't afford that we get down the road, this thing be struck down, and we have no revenue.
Well, we wasted those last 4 years.
Well-
Pretty obvious, don't you think?
I think we should have been looking at something different.
All right, so two questions. The first one, the willingness of the Progressive Caucus, and I will expand that to others, to the Black Caucus or aldermen generally, to invoke Rule 41, and basically to be more aggressive at trying to either interrupt the mayor's agenda or set their own agenda. Let's talk about that first. How come aldermen aren't more aggressive at basically dictating the agenda? I'll call him the veteran first, and he's really happy I'm doing this.
So in order to get anything passed, you count, do I have 26 votes or 35 votes to override a veto? And most of the time, the answer is no, you don't. So do you risk, because in theory, if he wants a stop sign in his ward, he has to get 26 votes. If he wants potholes filled or TIF in his ward, maybe not potholes, but TIF in his ward or other things, he has to get votes of other people. So if the chairman generally are going to stick together, because nobody wants something that's in our committee called out by others. And so generally you can't get people to overrule what a chairman has on his plate. It's just the way it is. I can't explain why that happens, but it's been a tradition, and people don't lightly break with tradition, because if it happens if it happens now, it'll happen to you later. Traditionally, aldermen didn't interfere with other people's wards until this Walmart thing. Then you had the Children's Museum. And I don't know what the next idea is going to be.
Well, talk particularly about Rule 41. Explain that one briefly.
So the city council sets its rules of how it will conduct its business. And Rule 41 allows aldermen to call the question, right? So when a ordinance that was introduced has been languishing in committee for, I believe it's 60 days. Right. Aldermen can Rule 41, which is then forcing the city council to take up the question as to whether or not that should be discharged from committee and brought to the floor. And one of the reasons why this is controversial is because, as Alderman Brookins explained, you are then forcing your colleagues to go on the record. And what I have been told by veterans of the city council who have been fighting the good fight is that whenever you Rule 41 something, people go up to you and say, you're trying to MF me, right? You're trying to get me on record where I can then be attacked by XYZ special interest group that will then say at my next election, they did not support XYZ measure. And so I think that because we do not have a partisan city council, right? And because we have a strong mayor system, which then injects another variable, people are very hesitant to push back against their colleagues. If it were a partisan system where we said you're of this party and you're of that party, then I think people would be more willing to engage in those fights. But because of the structure of our council, people are hesitant, and because of the fact that we turn to each other very often to say support this ordinance that affects only my community, people are hesitant to kind of put their colleagues on the spot.
And when we did have a Republican, he voted like a Democrat because his wife worked for trade unions.
You talk about Doherty?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I guess the net effect of all this is that the council does not have any kind of vigorous debate on the big issues that seem the most inspire people in Chicago. The most obvious one being that you're just talking about the charter school issue. It's just a resolution. It's not binding. It has no impact other than symbolism, and yet you can't even get a discussion because the chairman, in this case Will Burns, has not brought it to the table. And there's nothing you can do about that.
So one thing that I take solace in is that I try and tell myself it's more important what my constituents, what my family that decides whether or not I get to eat at Thanksgiving or not. It's more important what they think about me than what 49 members of the city council think about me. And so I am willing to invoke Rule 41. I am willing to defer and publish, which stalls a measure that you might not. I'm willing to engage in those fights, but like a good organizer, I know that you have to escalate to that point. And you have to organize the support so that people know why is it that you're doing it, and you're not just lone wolfing it, you're not just going out there alone, but that you have a team of people. So I'm willing to do it. I mean, I think it has to be the right issue, it has to be the right time, and that takes into a number of different variables that have to be taken into account.
Okay. Next question. In the back, waving.
The question is for Alderman Brookins.
I didn't do it.
You're talking about being quoted in the press as saying Ron has a black members of his staff and for people McCarthy, which I admire. But there was a 2011, 2014 study from UIC, Dick Simpson and other people did about the votes in the city council.
Yeah.
That found that you voted with Ron
100% of the time. Huh?
And for me, best friend, girlfriend, Jesus Christ himself, there's nobody who I agree with 100% of the time.
And I agree with that, but the question.
Not a single thing to vote against Ron Emanuel during those 3 years.
Okay, so the question is, Professor Simpson at UIC regularly, I think it's at least every couple years, publishes this report where he analyzes all of the divided roll call votes at city council. And it's worth noting, by the way, that the vast majority of votes at city council are unanimous. the vast majority. So the roll call is like a fraction of a fraction. The divided votes are a fraction of a fraction. But of those divided votes, Professor Simpson's found in his last study that you voted with Rahm all the time.
Right.
So we're asking you to defend your existence here.
If I disagree with my wife, I'm not going to come in this room, and you're not going to know that I disagree with my wife. We're going to hash it out and work the issue out. And what I have found in Rahm Emanuel, when I have had issues about certain things, he has changed or modulated what the particular legislation was. I'm not one to vote no just to vote no. And there are certain people who have been cast in that light that if Rahm says yes, they're going to say no, and therefore they can never get anything done. And so that is how I defended. I was out there, no, 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 and people still said, oh, you always vote with Daley. So I don't know that it makes a difference, but Mick is right. If you added up all of the votes, every alderman votes with the mayor 97% of the time, because the vast majority of the votes are unanimous.
Isn't that
And-
anti-democratic? I mean, don't the people deserve to know what your disagreements are with the mayor?
I think that the people do, because I've never shut up. I've always said what my disagreements were in public. I was first to come out and say, I don't like the garbage tax. And they're like, well, I don't like the garbage tax. And so there are ways that you can push and shape public policy and an agenda and get people to move off a point that they may be stuck on. I've also been one to say, I don't like mandatory minimums. I don't like this. I don't like that. I don't like another. But in the overall arching scheme of legislation, the question is, are those disagreements at that particular time sufficient enough to say no? When they said the same thing about me with Daley, 4 of the votes had to be Walmart votes, which were my votes that I was trying to get this Walmart in my area. So without saying which one of these things would you have voted against, I don't know that that's a fair criticism. Because even some of the progressives, not 100% of them have been on everything with respect to the divided roll call.
So one thing I want to say is that I'm really envious of Mayor Rahm Emanuel because he has a perfectly organized operation. I've come into committee meetings where the chairman walks in and says, what are we voting on today? What's happening? And he's handed a script, and the script says what the chairman is to read and to say, and the chairman reads it. And then a bureaucrat from the respective city agency testifies. And then someone asks a question that really has no bearing on the matter that is being presented before the committee, and then everyone votes aye. So the mayor, in many respects, knows, right, what will pass through city council, right? And he likes it that way. And my feeling is that he likes it that way because when he's cutting deals with the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, when he's cutting deal with Boeing, they know that they don't have to worry about the 50 lowly aldermen in the city council, right? That he's the final decision maker, right? And if you want to cut deals that are in the best interest of the rich and powerful, that's a good system to have. But if you feel that instead we should have a democratic system where there is a public, transparent, and inclusive debate, then that isn't the perfect system that we should have. So one thing that I think is critically important is the role of elections. It's our responsibility, right, as people that are not happy with the status quo to go out and organize, because a good number of those aldermen that are there will be on the right side, right, will be happy to see an independent city council if we can make it happen in the city of Chicago. And I really think that we can.
You made it happen in the 35th.
That's true.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a quick question about ward level stuff, because you defeated Carlos. You defeated an incumbent alderman with what, 75% of the vote? Was
67.
67. Sorry, I gave you 8 extra percentage points there. But that's a pretty decisive election. In Howard, you have this 100% with Rahm record, but your ward has traditionally voted against the incumbent mayor. I think at a pretty a pretty high rate. Maybe not at over 50%, but through the Daley years, it was one of the highest no votes.
They were voting for Daley. So, you know, one of the things, and you learn it really quick, and I didn't vote for Daley. I didn't vote for Daley. And even in my ward, it would be the lowest percentage, but he always got a majority. He always got a majority higher than my vote. Even when I was out there saying Emperor had no clothes, all of this other stuff about Daley, Daley would get more votes than me. And so sometimes you figure that, do you just hear people who complain louder? Well, who are these people who are voting for Daley? Because they're clearly out there. And the same thing with Rahm Emanuel.
How often do you have transparent meetings with constituents in your ward?
Sure. I have town hall meetings once a month. Well, about 80 to 100. We do robocalls. The 21st Ward traditionally has been the highest voting ward in the city of Chicago with respect to Democratic voters, followed by the 8th Ward and the 21st Ward would change places. Now that I've been in this remap, which pushed me a little bit further north and west, we're still within the top 3. I also meet with my constituents on a regular basis, so anybody who wants to come to see me one-on-one can talk to me each week in my office, and we'll talk about their concerns.
The reason I ask that question is because you're supposed to represent your constituents, and I don't know how many live in your ward
All of them.
versus, no, I don't. We never know. But also I want to know numerically, how many people are in your ward? Each of you, I want to contrast and compare
So
what's going on.
traditionally, and right now, since we just had a census, there are roughly 53,000 people in each and every ward. Now, as time goes by, more people move in and more people move out, those numbers are going to shift. The population had been trending towards downtown, which is why all of the people who lived on the south side started pushing their wards more north and squeezing them in. And I agree with you, but I don't conduct a plebiscite. This is a representative democracy, and people did vote me in office, and they did have a clear choice for somebody else to represent them. My community overwhelmingly, and ever since I've been the alderman, have voted for the incumbent mayor. They voted for Rahm Emanuel when I did not back Rahm Emanuel and told them as such. And so if that is the case, then I should always vote with Rahm Emanuel 100% of the time if you're telling me I need to vote for what my constituents want, because my constituents have said, we want you to work with Rahm Emanuel.
Who did you endorse? I just can't remember. Who did you endorse? And
Danny Davis, Carol Mosley Braun. I was out in front and
Anybody
often
but
did mail-ins for him, et cetera. And the community said, no, this is who we want.
so ultimately, you just stayed out of that election.
No,
Well,
we tried. We knocked
Yeah.
on doors. We passed out pamphlets. I asked the residents, well, what did he promise you? Well, and then it would get back to what Barack Obama said.
oh yeah.
And so after that, it was like, well, I'm running for re-election. Will you just vote for me?
yeah.
But to your, I think the central part of your question is, you know, and what they're both arguing is that their wards are different. They have different people and in them. And, you know, Howard, you have a lot of public sector workers in
I
your
do.
ward, right? So you have a lot of teachers and cops and traditionally city workers in your ward. And Carlos, your ward certainly at this point in time is a far more independent-minded ward, right?
Yeah, so I have approximately 56,000 residents. 67% of the voters chose Chuy Garcia as their choice. But that said, I also do think that people just also didn't know what choice they were making. So I think if they had had the information that they needed, they would have chosen Chuy over Rahm. But that said, to your question about the meetings, I've committed to govern in a democratic, transparent, and inclusive process. And so that means that any zoning changes that are occurring in the ward, that means that any development decisions that are being made, we turn to residents and we ask them for their input. I also knock doors on a weekly basis, so I'm constantly out in the neighborhoods, knocking on people's doors and asking them how things are going on their block. And then, like nearly almost every alderman, I have board nights on a regular basis where people can come in on a first come, first served basis, sit down with me and tell me what's going on.
I think that you govern based on where you are at the individual time. I strangely enough, I used to do a talk show with the Republican radio show host, African American guy named Charles Butler on WVON. We used to talk on Tuesday, and we frequently would disagree. He invited me out to a golf outing where I saw Brian Doherty, a Tea Party event, nonetheless, and made the parallel, which is really amazing and true, that the Black Lives Matter movement and the Tea Party movement really parallel in a lot of ways. And one, they talk about overreach of the government. Black people are saying, hey, the government is out of control. You're going around choking people, trampling on their civil rights, et cetera. And the Tea... No, it's happened in Waco. It's happened in a couple other places that the government has overreached with respect to the Tea Party. And it just really made
Well, it
me
wasn't
think
Tea Party
about...
in Waco, but I understand.
Well, the larger point is I don't believe that everybody in the South is a Republican, but they're Republicans because of who and where they are, and that is the way they tend to govern and vote. All politics is extremely local.
All right. And we are out of time here, and I didn't even get the chance to ask you guys about the Chicago Cubs, which of course is the main thing I wanted to talk about, and because I know that Alderman Brookins is at least a sometime fan of the Cubs, and
I love Lee Smith.
he loved Lee Smith.
He had
Yeah.
the cherry curl juice, put it on the ball, strike out the side.
All right. On that note, thanks to all you guys for being here. Thanks to the aldermen for coming here and sharing their thoughts. We don't agree with everybody all the time, but that's how we have the discussion. Thanks all you guys for coming out, and we'll see you next month. Go Cubs.